Awesome. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for taking the time this evening to be here. RPEC and Reestablished Richmond are certainly excited about this event. We put some work into it and we're hoping to give you all what you're looking for this evening. We went ahead and titled tonight, The Art of Welcoming. Our goal for this talk is to give our listeners really a bird's eye view of what the resettlement and relocation process looks like for new immigrants and refugees. We'll talk through a little bit of Laura Berge Jones' life and her career, and also give some updates on the resettlement and relocation efforts happening with the Afghan communities here in the Greater Richmond area. So just going to start with some introduction. So of course, RPEC, the Richmond Peace Education Center, is dedicated to building a nonviolent and inclusive community through action and grassroots work. Of course, our guest organization this evening is Reestablished Richmond. They are dedicated to connecting refugees and new immigrants to the resources needed to establish roots, build community, and become self-sufficient. And our guest speaker this evening is Laura Berge Jones, the Associate Director of Reestablished Richmond. And from there, I don't know if you want to give us just a quick hello, Laura, and then we'll jump into our first topic for this evening.
Yes, hello everybody, welcome. It's really nice to see some familiar faces and some familiar names. And just want to say I'm really glad to see several of our staff with us tonight. It helps calm my nerves a little bit. But it's really great to be here. Thank you for asking.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I guess I should give a quick introduction of me. I'm Avi Calhoun. I work as a subject matter expert in teen programming for the YMCA of Greater Richmond, and I am on the volunteer committee that helps put together the after dinner conversations. I certainly want to give some space and shout out to Rada, to Jennifer, and to Ellie, who are also serving as members on the committee that help put these events together for our community. So you guys can go ahead and do a wave if you want to. Don't want to put you on the spot, but I thought it would be important to highlight you all as well. Great, cool. So for starters, I think when we first initially had our meeting, Laura, it was really important for me to just learn a little bit about your early career in life and how you got really interested into this work, and then eventually how it led you to Reestablish Richmond. And I thought that would be a good place for us to start and just focus on you as an individual and then jump into the work that Reestablished is doing. So feel free to tell us your life story.
Okay, well, so I don't know that I ever thought I would get to this place or this work that I'm doing. It's not something that I set out to do from the beginning. It wasn't like a career goal, but being here now does make a lot of sense as I look back over my life. I grew up in the Midwest in the 1980s. And at that point, the career options presented to me were education, medicine, and engineering. And I was not a math or science person, and so I became a teacher. And I have a lot of teachers on both sides of my family too. So that made some sense. But back then I had no idea that the intercultural navigation that I was doing from the beginning would become such a basis of my work now. So I grew up in the suburbs of Flint, Michigan, and we were exactly halfway between one set of grandparents that lived in a small town on the edge of Green Bay in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, and another set of grandparents that were living in the urban sprawl of Louisville, Kentucky. And so from the get-go, I was navigating these different cultures and different ways of looking at the world. And so I think because I, even though I didn't recognize it at the time, I loved both sets of my grandparents and my family members. And so I just became comfortable, I think, navigating those differences. And I really enjoyed being with people from diverse backgrounds. I was raised in the Christian faith, and had a very strong sense of just a real strong desire to make a positive impact in the world. And after college graduation, I was able to travel to Kenya on a missions trip. And there I was introduced to Rift Valley Academy. It's a boarding school for the children of missionaries across Africa. And within a few years, I moved there and taught at Rift Valley Academy, this beautiful school on the edge of the Great Rift Valley. And I was in Kenya for 6 years. 4 of those years, I was there at the school, and 2 of those years, I was actually living in Nairobi, and I was collaborating on a cross-cultural team that was studying the religions and lifestyles and cultures of Kenyan Asians. So these are folks, 3rd and 4th generation from India and Pakistan. And we were working I was working to advance mutual trust and understanding between the diverse religions and different, the different faith traditions. Folks were Muslim and Hindu and Sikh primarily. And again, I just absolutely loved it. I was really, really lucky to have a Punjabi Muslim family living next door, that adopted me into their family. I think probably they felt sorry for me because I was an unmarried woman living alone apart from my family, which made no sense in their culture at all. And just getting to know them during those 2 years and spending so much time with their family, I got to see up close how they showed up for, first of all, just in their family relationships, but also just living their faith in such a genuine way. And it wasn't really the first time that I had gotten to know someone from a different faith background, but it certainly was the first time that I had that inside view. And I think the relationship that we built and the ways that they just embodied goodness and generosity and devotion just really impacted me and helped deepen my understanding, I think, of the essential goodness of humanity. I met my husband in Kenya, and together we moved later to Cyprus and then to England over the next 10 years. And, in each of those countries, I really learned the value of friendship and not just friendship, but really investing in those relationships. And, I acknowledge that as a white woman and an American, I was navigating all of these friendships and transitions from a very privileged perspective. And, that is a real thing. And at the same time, it was very impactful to me that I was welcomed and I was allowed to get to know the culture from the inside, from the perspective of my friends. They helped me kind of navigate and get to know and understand these foreign systems and ways of getting things done. And just really cultivated within me this real sense of belonging in countries that were not my own. Like, there was no reason that I should have had that sense. But it was those relationships that really made that happen for me. And looking back, I can say that those years of cross-cultural living for me were very, like, if I had to pick a theme, it would be that they were very humanizing. I really got a strong sense of my own humanity and the humanity of the people around me. In 2012, our family moved back to the United States. We settled here in Richmond. And a few years later, I was introduced to the work of Reestablish Richmond through our involvement with Tabernacle Baptist Church. And I actually reached out to Kate Ayers, our executive director, at the same time that Reestablish Richmond was looking for someone to fill a real critical role. And it just happened to be that my unique background and skill set were the right fit for the organization. And to be honest, the organization felt the same, like the right fit for me. You know, the work that Reestablish Richmond does is very fulfilling to me personally as well as professionally. And I think in a very real and deep way, this work feels like an opportunity to pay forward what was given to me. So just being able to extend the gift of welcome, to practice that in such practical ways, has honestly helped me regain a sense of belonging in my own home country after all those years away. So that's how I got here.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, I resonate so much with a lot of what you're saying. I've had the chance to live abroad as well. Again, still as a privileged white boy from the US, but I wanted to ask one follow-up question before we jump into the rest of it related to this topic of being a foreigner in a new space and a new culture. It might help because I'm sure some of our audience has also traveled abroad and experienced living in another culture. What were some of those challenges that you were facing where that friendship, that community, and that value of belonging like really helped you? What were some of the challenges that you faced personally? Because I think it might be good for us to connect that, because obviously I'm sure when a new immigrant or someone seeking refugee status in the US is also going to experience potential similar feelings, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think, you know, certain things, like really basic things, actually, right? Like just how to get the bus from the neighborhood where we're living to the place I want to go, right? And then how to find the correct bus to get back home, because they weren't necessarily, you know, you didn't get dropped off in the same place that, you know, the pickup started. So just navigating things like that. I think it's, you know, when I was living in Kenya, especially, we had dial-up internet, but that was it, right? So no cell phones, you know, just really depending on face-to-face interactions and personal connections. So sometimes, you know, something as simple as trying to figure out a substitution for a recipe, you know, where I was living, a lot of Americans would like bring things with them that were American, you know, packages of taco mix or, you know, chocolate chips or whatever. And I just remember kind of finding that funny, thinking there's amazing Cadbury chocolate here. Why not just chop up a chocolate bar? But I think in terms of those friendships, just navigating things like, you know, getting to the post office and standing in the correct line, right? Because you can spend 3 hours standing in a line and then you get to the window and you're in the wrong line, right? And so just like, and strangers helping navigate, you know, I mean, I can tell a lot of stories. I just traveling by myself and having people looking out for me, people hosting me to stay overnight because the train leaving was, you know, early in the morning. I had someone actually wake me up on a train to tell me that the person I was meeting was outside because I didn't realize that the stop was going to be in the middle of the night. I thought it was in the morning. So yeah, people really looking out for me. It's a gift.
It is definitely helpful. You're giving me like terrifying flashbacks of being in Tel Aviv post office and like having no idea like what I'm doing or like where I'm going. So, wow, the post. Great. So you've highlighted some really great themes here, right? Friendship, community, creating a sense of belonging, and all of those themes are going to really come up throughout this entire conversation. So I just think it's really important for me to reflect them back. And another thing that you touched on in your own experience working in Kenya is just the faith-based action. And so I wanted to kind of talk about Reestablish Richmond's origin story of how you guys how you guys came about, and what that faith-based action work looked like in the early days, and kind of where you're at now with all of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So Reestablish Richmond was started out of Tabernacle Baptist Church. The church had been, over a number of years, kind of declining in membership. And with a new pastor and his young family coming in, his children were the only ones in the nursery, right? So like the church just started really praying for families to come. And at some point they had a phone call from some folks who had been missionaries in Burma and said there are some families here that are from Burma. They were Baptists there, they're refugees, and they're looking for a place that they can worship. And they had fled religious-based persecution, so it was a big deal for them. And so, the pastor was like, absolutely, love to have them. And so they came. I think as the story goes, one family came the first Sunday and several families came the next Sunday. And the family, I think there was one teenager that spoke a little bit of English, or a young girl, but everybody else, no English. But they sat and they listened in the service. And it wasn't until folks stood up to sing out of the hymnal that these folks were able to really participate, because they knew the same hymns, right? Just in their language. But that started a really beautiful work of the congregation coming together and getting to know these families and stepping in to host English classes and take folks to the doctor and start navigating like parent-teacher conferences and, things that are brand new and very different here. And after a while, though, the individuals, the folks in the congregation, found that they were really burning out. And that is when one of the church members, Patrick Brawford, decided to start, with the help of some other folks, start this organization, Reestablish Richmond, just to have a real kind of a place of balance and I think foundational support for both newcomer families and people who were trying to, provide some support. So, as I said, the folks from Burma were fleeing a religious-based conflict. And at the time, the two resettlement agencies in town were both faith-based. And some of what the families were experiencing were kind of gaps in the services that were being provided at the time. And so it was decided at the very beginning that Reestablish Richmond as an organization would not be faith-based in order to be a real safe and neutral space for refugees and new immigrants, no matter what their background is. And I have to say, it's one of my favorite things about the organization. And part of that is because we have been able to collaborate with so many faith communities across the greater Richmond area, and so many of our volunteers who are motivated by faith to get involved in this work. It's really been a lovely thing to see kind of this beautiful cross-section of humanity here in Richmond, people getting involved and just giving the best they have with their whole heart.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I think one of the things about my role in the Y that I've loved so much and getting to know the community more here, even though I'm from Richmond, this is the first time I've worked in like a nonprofit here, is just how diverse Richmond really is when you start to actually seek it out and look. Super interesting. I wanted to ask you, you just mentioned that the communities from Burma were fleeing a religious-based conflict. And I thought it would be really important if we could quickly touch on just what are the common reasons why you're seeing refugees needing to relocate in areas? As RPEC, we are a organization dedicated to creating more nonviolent communities around the world, and we are heavily rooted in conflict resolution. So I'm curious to see where, conflict is in this area, or if it's environmental, et cetera.
Yeah, well, so I think it's important to understand, even though we use the term in a lot of different ways, the word refugee is actually a legal term. It's defined by the United Nations. And someone who is considered a refugee has been forcibly displaced from their home, from violence and persecution and trauma. And they've not just been forcibly displaced from their home, but from their home country. They've had to cross an international border. And then in that second country, request refugee status. That is a very long process that, from the time of getting to the, UNHCR place where they can request that, it's an average, well, the average varies according to country, I think. But, if you move very sort of smoothly through that vetting process, it's about 2 years. And of the over 84 million forcibly displaced people in the world, and then when you get down to, how many of those folks are displaced within their own country and how many are, eventually are able to return to their country, refugees are unable to return home. They are, their lives are threatened and it's not a safe space for them. But those who are granted refugee status, it's less than 1% of folks are ever resettled in a third country. And the criteria to be granted refugee status is vulnerability. So,
sorry,
yeah,
1%, 1% of the individuals that are going through the UN to get refugee status are actually approved
to be resettled in a third country.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't remember when we talked in our last conversation. I'm like the utter shock that I'm feeling in that moment. It's just that's an insane statistic.
Yeah. Yes, it really is. So you were asking about how were you asking the process that someone goes through?
That's where we can move into now. So it sounds like you kind of touched on the process a little bit and how it starts. And if you could just kind of talk us through the middle and then where it ends, that would be amazing as well.
Okay. So when folks are first resettled here in the United States, there is federal funding for the refugee resettlement program. And that federal funding also supports agencies like the USCIS that, navigates green card applications and citizenship and things like that. But that federal funding also supports resettlement agencies. And then those resettlement agencies provide initial support from welcoming people off the airplane to taking them to their first apartment, helping folks find their first job, helping, navigate, getting their immunization so that their kids can be enrolled in school, all of these very, first step things. And that is usually for 3 to 6 months. And, even though a lot of those things sound kind of simple, it can take up to 3 to 6 months to get all those things in place. Sometimes folks are also able to access the support through the Department of Social Services, and that's really helpful too. So that state funding is really critical. And, you know, counties like Henrico County is here in our area. It has been really instrumental, especially among our client communities. But, you know, we see some really supportive folks in Richmond City and Chesterfield too. So, yeah, I think, you know, the way that we have seen as Reestablish Richmond community members stepping in to support folks and kind of extend that initial support, you know, on the way toward that long-term integration, that has been really beautiful.
And if I remember correctly from our conversations, you mentioned that Reestablish acts as like a gap filler to help build that long-term aspect. And I think just for time's sake, I want to make sure we focus on Reestablish and the work that you guys are doing. So let's just jump there. How does Reestablish act as a gap filler for these communities when they get here and they're looking for these resources and these partners, all of these things?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate it. So all of our programming is very practical in nature, and it has come out of just responding to the needs of our client communities, things that our clients have identified as, you know, this is my goal. And a lot of our client referrals are coming from the resettlement agencies, as well as social services and health department, and a lot of other community members too. We've had referrals from librarians and neighbors, but you know, the things that when we sit down and meet with clients initially, we want to figure out like what resources they already have, and then ask them, you know, what are your goals? What do you want to do? What are your top 3 things? And so folks usually mention getting a driver's license, needing to learn English, sometimes are looking for other referrals or other organizations, things that we don't necessarily provide, but we're able to kind of make those connections for folks. And down the road, folks are looking for help navigating the citizenship test and that process, among other things. But yeah, all of our work really centers our client communities, and we try to just focus on what they are self-determining is important.
That self-determination point, I think it's a really big, important part. I know we were talking and we talked a lot about the client ownership that Reestablishment has, and them coming in actually seeking and asking and pinpointing like to you all what they need. Is that actually rare in this sector? Like, or do most organizations give the client ownership? Because I'm thinking from my perspective, like an organization might say like, here's what you need, here's what you need, here's what you need. But when I'm understanding what you're saying is the client is coming to you, asking for support and telling you guys what they need, and then you're showing them where they need to go.
So I think, you know, it probably varies. I want to say for the resettlement agencies, there are specific things that they are required to provide. And so it makes a lot of sense, right, that they are guiding newcomers into, okay, you're going to need a job. This one is a good fit, and this is why, you know. And so I think that it's fair to acknowledge the wisdom of that guidance. But I think as an organization, we've been really intentional to, as we're looking to provide that long-term integration support, that we really want to emphasize the humanity and the human dignity of our clients. All of us want to decide for ourselves what's important to us, right? Like we all want to provide for our families, and we all have goals and things that are important to us that may or may not be exactly the same as somebody else, right? And so I think as an organization, we've just really decided to be really as mindful as we can to try to avoid that white saviorism of, you know, that paternalism of like, I know what you need, I know what's best for you, and just invite clients to be honest, and then being honest back about like, okay, if that's your goal, this is what we can help with, this is what we can't, this is how we can connect you. And then what people, you know, once people have access to the tools that they need, how they move forward with those tools is up to them. And again, people are unique and have their own things that they're dealing with. But yeah, I think that's been it's been an intentional choice. It's not always easy to work, but it's important.
Of course, related to that client ownership and how it builds trust, I'm wondering, like, from reestablishment perspective, what other what has also helped you be successful in building trust outside of just the ownership that the client has?
I think the fact that, you know, from the beginning, I was going to say from the beginning, which was before I got started, right? Like when I got started, it was already in action. I was watching Kate, our director, navigating and breaking down the barriers that our clients were facing, and leveraging our white privilege, leveraging our privilege as, you know, US born and raised, right? Like our knowledge of how things work, leveraging that on behalf of newcomers, and just identifying, you know, the biggest barriers for folks are transportation and language access. And just, you know, every time that barrier comes up, just pushing against it, and then walking, you know, alongside clients and empowering, you know, just sharing information and experiences side by side. So, you know, the first time, so that the next time somebody, you know, that client has some familiarity. I'm thinking of navigating the DMV, you know, the first time you go, you have no idea how this is supposed to happen, right? But, you know, if you've got an interpreter with you and you've got somebody explaining step by step, these are the resources that are available to you, this is what you can expect, then the next time you go back, it's a little less scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember us talking, and that was like one of the big things, the transportation and the driver's license being such a barrier. So I'm glad we were able to touch on that. So just for our participants, just so we can do a little bit of a time check, I'm going to segue now into the updates on the Afghan communities here in Richmond. And then we also have added in a optional Q&A after that section. If you'd like to stay on, Laura will be here to answer questions from the audience as well. But to transition us, Laura, I'm curious to know, what are the biggest differences in the relocation efforts with Afghan communities since the withdrawal? That was a big point when we were talking, like there was this difference. In the past, it was like this, but now it's like this after the withdrawal. I think it'd be good for us to start here.
Yeah, so I think in the past 10 years, the majority of folks from Afghanistan that have resettled here have come through something called the Special Immigrant Visa Program. And SIV, Special Immigrant Visa holders, are granted that status because they were working in support of the US military in their country. So we've had SIV folks from Iraq as well as Afghanistan, but in the last 10 years, specifically, that has been the majority of Afghan newcomers. And the number of Afghans with SIV status is nearly half of the total number of refugees. I mean, it's it's nearly half of the total number. So if you were to like add up all of the refugees and then all of the Afghan SIVs, they're like the same. So most folks who were coming from Afghanistan and resettling here, at least one person in the home had a lot of contact with Americans and was, were familiar with American culture, English language, and things like that. Primarily had some experience living in urban areas and had some higher levels of education, at least one of the adults in the home. And so the new folks who were coming in are, some of them were like in the SIV process, that vetting process, but many of them have had to come they were evacuated quickly and have come under something called Humanitarian Parole. And it's a different status. It's actually a temporary status, which means that they will have to apply for asylum at the end of that status. And folks who are coming with SIV status, they are able to apply for a green card immediately upon arriving, and that's a permanent, on the way to citizenship. So there's a huge difference right there. There's just a lot of lack of stability in that. I think another really huge piece of what's different though this time, right now, is so many people coming at once, and so many people coming at once and needing services and support, where the resettlement agencies have been really weakened over the past 4 or 5 years. And so we're trying to like rebuild this system at the same time as we've got this tremendous, need in the, for people needing support and services, and then agencies that were built to provide those services and support and not able to because they don't have the capacity. That's a huge difference, I think. I will say, one of the things that's really maybe a silver lining of this situation is that there's, because of the military connection with Afghanistan, it's an issue that has bipartisan support. Mm-hmm. And so, that's a good thing, because we've got to support these folks who are coming in. Let's see, I'm trying to think. I think another piece of that, just because of the increased demand for support and agencies scrambling to do what they can, but still, there's more folks. It's really been beautiful to see this outpouring from community members and faith communities specifically wanting to get involved and being invited in at the front end, really, of that resettlement process. Helping with things like housing, something like really basic like that, and setting up housing. That's been really, really cool to see.
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things that we were talking about was, you mentioned that Richmond has become almost a hub because of its close proximity to DC and the social services and the diverse employment opportunities that are here. I just saw a question come up in the chat that I thought would be important to point out here. How many Afghan refugees do we have currently settled here in the greater Richmond area? Now, if you don't have the exact number, that's okay.
So I think here in the greater Richmond area, it's about 1,500 Afghans. And a lot of the folks that are expected to resettle here now are coming in order to be reunited with family members or acquaintances, people that they have had connection with. It is expected that we will see here in the greater Richmond area another like 800 to 1,000 folks from Afghanistan. And since October 1st until like a week ago, the numbers are like 600 have already been resettled here. I know the numbers that I saw most recently of people who have cleared the domestic military bases is something like 55,000 in the country, but there's still more than 20,000 people who are yet to leave those bases.
Yep, great. And thank you, Rita. You're actually bringing me right to the next point. I think to kind of wind this section of our conversation down, I think the last thing that I would love to leave our audience with is just how our audience and everyday citizens can get active. You know, one of the big things we were talking about with your own international experience was that need for community, that need for welcoming and love and feeling like being accepted as just a human being and all of those needs. What can we do as just everyday citizens to help these, not just the Afghan individuals that have resettled here, but new immigrants as well?
Yeah, you know, on a really big scale, I think just individually connecting with your state legislators and, you know, elected officials and letting them know that these issues, you know, just being a welcoming community is really important, building systems that support newcomers. You know, I think that can make a huge difference, the more of us that are speaking up. But I think just, you know, on an individual basis, getting involved as a volunteer, getting matched to a particular family or individual to provide whatever the support is that they've requested, like learning English, or, you know, whatever it might be, just helping with those like real practical adjustments to things here. You know, for us as an organization, we're a nonprofit, and, you know, we rely on volunteers to provide a lot of these connective services for our clients. We rely on donations, obviously, to make all the things happen. And, you know, we spend the majority of our energy on our client programming. And so when it comes to something that we're trying to communicate out, like we don't have a communication strategist. And so just something as simple as following us on social media and sharing our posts. Like right now we've got a couple job opportunities. Like we would love to have those opportunities shared really widely. So those are just some, you know, small things, I think, but you know, you said it earlier. I think the biggest thing is just being a really kind and gentle human in the world, like anywhere and everywhere you go. You know, we really do have an impact on the people that we meet wherever we are. So I think that's probably the bottom line.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, I want to plug this again one more time, just because it's a core tenet of the Richmond Peace Education Center is nonviolence. And one of the big things that RPEC was active in pre-pandemic was anti-war movement and all of those things. And majority of the reasons we've talked about, at least in this call, have all been related to some sort of conflict or war. And so I just want to leave our audience with knowing that there are so many great organizations like Reestablish and the Richmond Peace Education Center here in Richmond that really are trying to build a better, nonviolent, just, and cooperative world. So we're so happy to see that. I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and transition to the Q&A now. I already see a couple of questions in the chat, so I'll start with the questions that I see. I'm going to give some ground rules as we start this section. First, and I'll put them in the chat as well. First and foremost, we ask if you are coming off mute to ask a question, totally great. We encourage it. Please use, or typing, please use a respectful tone and language. Number two, please limit your questions to 30 seconds or less. And then three, limit questions to one based on participation. So if it's not so many people are, we'll spend about another 10, 15 minutes in this Q&A. feel free to ask more, but to start, just one. So I will go ahead and read out the first question. Lisa Ramirez says, it's been challenging to support resettlement, both as a citizen and as a member of an organization that wants to help. Is there a way to navigate working with resettlement organizations? And I'd like to give Lisa the opportunity to come off mute if they'd like to explain context. No, you don't need to, just in case. I'll give it about like 3 seconds to see if that happens. All right, so I will go ahead and rephrase the question one more time, Laura, for you. Is there a way to navigate working with resettlement organizations as a citizen and as an organization or an individual working in a nonprofit organization?
That's a really good question. And I think, you know, what we have seen is the folks who are working in resettlement are so busy right now, again, like working with clients and trying to provide the services that are needed, that it's really hard to respond to all those emails and phone calls and, you know, people wanting to get involved. And so I would say, you know, partly patience, but also one of the things that we've been trying to do as an organization, and again, our director, Kate, is really amazing at this, is just bringing people together for a conversation to find out, you know, what's happening, what's needed, and how organizations, faith communities also can partner together instead of like duplicating services, really kind of collaborating more and getting more done in the process. I recognize that's not really a direct answer to the question. I just want to acknowledge that, you know, the struggle is real right now. Everybody's capacity is really limited. And so I guess if, you know, if repeated inquiries to resettlement agencies are not being responded to, you know, you can reach out to us and we'll see if we've got a connection that we can help make. That is, you know, it's a gap that we continue to fill.
Absolutely, thank you. Any other questions? Feel free to come up. Oh, hand raise, Rita, thank you.
I wrote the question down, but I didn't want it to come across in the wrong way. You mentioned empowering the immigrants to decide what is most important to them and following their lead in terms of what their needs are. But as a volunteer, how do you manage your personal feelings when you see the immigrants making poor choices or maybe making the same mistakes over and over? And a lot of times it's a cultural difference. And I'm really speaking from experience. So the last part of what I was going to say is, how do we change our opinion of what success is when there's such a cultural difference? Thanks, Laura.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are really good questions, Rita. And I know those experiences are difficult to navigate. And I know that when we get involved personally, it's really easy to take things personally when we're doing our best to try to help, and what we perceive as important is maybe not received as, you know, in the same way. And I think maybe it goes to your question about what does success look like. And I think success really looks like providing tools and making resources accessible. If they're accessible, then the person has the choice, right? Whether they use the tools or not. And I think that's really the key to empowerment, is providing those tools. You know, people make choices based on the choices they have, right? And so, yeah, it is hard though.
I would say we have time for about 2 more questions. If anyone wants to come off mute or type in the chat. Well,
Well, I just
Oh.
have a quick question, I guess. Are
go.
there specific things that are needed or jobs that you could, that you could just mention to us that I mean, very specific, like it's like, I mean, you have a need for a couch, or are there specific like jobs that people are looking for?
And Laura, maybe you can add to that. How does one become a volunteer? What is your process for training, and how do you plug people in?
Yeah, these are great questions. So to the first question about what's needed, I think, for the folks who are trying to set up apartments and things like that, the obvious thing is furniture, but it's very, none of the resettlement agencies have the capacity to like manage furniture donations. And so just, donating, if you're downsizing, if you're getting rid of something, consider donating to Caritas, because that's where the resettlement agencies are doing their shopping for folks. And I think, in terms of volunteering, one of the things that we have, I think, really done well with is providing information and training for our volunteers. You can go on our website to sign up to volunteer, and we have an amazing director of our volunteer engagement who provides the training and the equipment or equipping. And we have a lot of amazing opportunities right now, from providing, serving as an English tutor to helping, if anyone has language skills in any of the primary languages of our client communities, Spanish, French, Swahili, as well as Arabic and Dari and Pashto. People who are coming in brand new, one of the things that they really are looking for is access to getting a driver's license. And so we're trying to provide some ways that we can share that information, just, what the process looks like, as well as access to study resources right away. And so, trying to communicate all of that. If you've got language skills, that would be a real gift. We do have some other volunteer opportunities listed on our website as well. We also, I'm very excited about, we have an amazing Refugee and Immigrant Volunteer Summit coming up the first weekend, starting the beginning of February, and we've got some amazing things happening. So you can sign up to participate in those virtual meetings and hear from some great speakers. Some are local and some are beyond our area. But this is a collaboration with the International Rescue Committee and Sacred Heart Center, and it has just become a real highlight of every year, for sure. So I don't know, I think, did I answer all those questions, I hope?
I think so.
Laura, if it's okay, I'm going to just jump in about volunteer, because I've had a couple of messages about volunteer opportunities. So our next volunteer orientation and training, it looks like it's not until April, because I think actually we had a training today at 5 o'clock for our most recent batch of volunteers. And because of capacity, we can only onboard and train, a certain number at a time, but keep checking in. Our volunteer coordinator's email is on our website. And if you have a special gift or thing that you want to contribute and volunteer that you think is filling a real gap, reach out to her, because sometimes she does do volunteer trainings in between our quarterly ones. But just know we are the beneficiaries of lots of excited volunteers, and we love our volunteers. But it looks like our next official training isn't until April.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Kate. You guys are speaking. I was going to prompt all of this, but it's just happening naturally. So that's fantastic. Great. Is there any last question that we'll ask? And then from there, let's see. Awesome. Well, again, I just want to say thank you. And Laura, I know we just talked about the forum, but there was one more thing I thought if it makes sense to just uplift a little bit was the, where did I write it down? The Refugee Voices and Ambassador Program. I just wondered if you could just leave us like with just a little bit of what that is and how individuals could get involved and or reach out and potentially, yeah, get involved.
Yeah. Well, thank you for asking about that. So, you know, it's always really lovely and exciting for us to be able to share from our perspective as staff. But it can be, you know, a lot of times the folks in the community are really wanting to hear from someone who has gone through and experienced the resettlement process themselves. And so Reestablish Richmond partnered with VPM and we're able to provide some training for some of our clients who have volunteered to be trained in how to tell their story. And so these are our refugee, okay, sorry, it just left me, but the voices and ambassadors, yeah, the refugee voices and ambassadors. So if you or another organization that you're part of would like to have someone from that program come and speak to you, there is a way that you can request that on our website. There is a cost involved for that because we want to make sure that folks are compensated for sharing that experience and for their time. But that is, yeah, Kate has just put it into the chat, that link too. But it's really an impactful thing to hear from folks firsthand what their experience has been like.
Thank you for that. And what I will say about the chat, I've noticed that the Reestablish Richmond website has gone out. I noticed that the link and the information for the speaker series has gone out, and then also there's now a link for the request a speaker. I'm gonna save this chat. I'm sure I can get a hold of an email list of all the participants who are here, and we'll make sure you get all of these resources directly. But with that, I want to give Laura just any space to say any final words before we end this evening, and then I'll take us out from there.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Avi. Thank you for this time. Thank you, everybody, for joining. It's been a real gift. And again, I think, you know, in addition to just the real blessing that it is to work with our client communities and our amazing volunteers and community partners, honestly, we have the best team. And I am so grateful to be able to be among these incredible humans and to be able to do this work. So thanks again for everything. It's been lovely.
And thank you, Laura, for taking this opportunity. I just want to again lift up Reestablish Richmond. Thank you all so much for being here. The Richmond Peace Education Center, not only for hosting these after dinner conversations, but giving me the opportunity to host. And just some personal promotion, I'm Avi Calhoun. You can follow all of us, Reestablish, RPEC, and me on Instagram. And in addition, I just launched my podcast this past week that's all rooted in emotional intelligence, spirituality, and conflict resolution. So give it a listen. I'm going to put all of this here in the chat. And thank you everyone so much for being here. We will have our next event in February. The date is to be determined. Make sure you follow RPEC so you get all of that information, and it will also come through email as well. Thank you.